Parshat Vayikrah, the grand opening of the book of Leviticus, where we dive headfirst into the intricate world of korbanot, or offerings. The Parsha opens with Vayikra el Moshe, and he called to Moses. That tiny aleph in the Vayikra has fascinated commentators for centuries. Why is it small? Some say it hints at Moshe's humility. Unlike Balaam, who gets bombastic Vayikar, an almost accidental encounter with the divine, Moshe's calling is personal and intimate, yet he remains humble despite being the prophet. Then we get into the korbanot consisting of 5 levels of dedication. The olah, or burnt offerings, total dedication to Hashem, going up in smoke, literally. The mincha, or grain offering, even the simple flour offering is honored. Some say it is the korban of the poor. Shalomim, or peace offering, a communal meal, a sign of unity between Hashem, the priest, and the people. Chatat, or sin offering, a way to atone for unintentional sins because intent matters in Judaism. And Dasham, or the guilt offering, for specific infractions, sometimes requiring compensation or restitution. But why all these sacrifices? Why were they necessary for the people? Maimonides saw them as a concession to the times. Hashem allowed Israel to channel their need for ritual in a structured way rather than engaging in the pagan bloodbaths of their neighbors. Nachmanides, on the other hand, viewed them as deeply mystical, an act of transferring one's soul symbolically onto the altar. For us today, in the 21st century, without a temple, Vayikra challenged us to find spiritual equivalents, prayer or tefillah, self-sacrifice for a greater good, and acts of charity or tzedakah. Each korban represents an aspect of ourselves. The olah reminds us to give fully of ourselves to a higher purpose. The chatat tells us to own our own mistakes. And the shalomim urges us to seek harmony in our relationships. Even though we don't bring korbanot today, Parshat Vayikra still asks, what are you willing to give? What are you ready to burn away to get closer to source? Now, I want to take just a few more minutes for a bit deeper dive into this who concept of the korbanot, or the sacrifices. This is one of the most fascinating and controversial aspects of Temple Judaism. The whole concept of animal sacrifice seems bizarre to modern sensibilities, but it was deeply embedded in the ancient world. So let's unpack it. The origins of animal sacrifice goes deep into the smoky past of humanity. Animal sacrifice wasn't unique to Judaism. It was practically universal among ancient civilizations, from Mesopotamia to Egypt, from Greece to the Mayans and the Aztecs. Nearly every ancient culture practiced some form of sacrificial offering. The basic idea was that the gods were the ultimate providers of life, and giving something valuable like food was an expression of gratitude, atonement, or petition. When did a more enlightened Judaism, or I should say, why did a more enlightened Judaism stick with it? Well, first, cultural continuity. The Israelites emerged in a world where sacrifice was the primary form of worship. Early Israelite religion didn't develop in a vacuum. It was shaped by its Near Eastern context. The Torah's sacrificial system shares similarities with those of the Canaanites, the Sumerians, and Egyptians, but is distinct in its monotheistic framework. The second reason is divine command. The Torah presents korbanot as a commandment from source, particularly in Leviticus. But was this an accommodation to human nature? Some scholars argue that source permitted sacrifices as a means to channel the Israelites' existing religious instincts in a more refined way. Thirdly, symbolism and ritual function play a part. The korbanot weren't about feeding Hashem, as in some pagan systems. Instead, they were a deeply symbolic act. Atonement, or kapara, the blood of the sacrifice, was a symbolic substitute representing the life force of the individual or nation seeking forgiveness. there's communal bonding. Many offerings, like the peace offerings, were actually meals shared between the priest, the offerer, and Hashem, fostering unity. Recognition of source's sovereignty, bringing the first and best of one's flock or crops, was a way to acknowledge that all sustenance ultimately comes from source. However, that brings us to the real question. Did Hashem really want sacrifices? There's an interesting tension in the Tanakh itself. Prophets like Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Hosea criticized Israel for overemphasizing sacrifices while neglecting justice and righteousness. Hosea 6:6 famously says, "For I desire steadfast love and not sacrifice, the knowledge of Hashem rather than burnt offerings." Some have interpreted this as source tolerating korbanot rather than truly desiring them. Maimonides, or the Rambam, took this a step further, arguing that sacrifices were an evolutionary step, a necessary accommodation to wean people off idolatrous practices. His view? Prayer and moral behavior were the ultimate goals, the ultimate sacrifice. We aren't adhering to the sacrificial system today. When and why did these sacrifices end? Well, with the destruction of the Second Temple by Rome in 70 CE, the Common Era, the entire korban system became impossible to perform. Rather than seeing this as a crisis, the sages pivoted to prayer, Torah study, and acts of loving kindness. These became the replacement for sacrifices, which many sages felt this was Hashem's intent all along. In a way, Judaism moved beyond its sacrificial origins, refining its approach to divine connection. So we have to ask, will the third temple bring sacrifices back once it's built? Now we are wading into controversial theological debates. Some expect a literal return of the korban system, while others, like Rav Kook, believe that only non-animal sacrifices, the grain offerings, for example, would be reinstated. The prophetic vision of a more enlightened world suggests that perhaps, by the time Mashiach comes, and may it happen in our time, humanity will have outgrown the need for animal sacrifices and animal offerings of any kind. So korbanot may now be a relic of a time long past, but they served a function, transitioning a people from a world of idolatry to one of ethical monotheism. And once that transition was complete, Judaism evolved further. You could say that this was the real sacrifice, leaving behind an old way of thinking for something greater. What do you think? Were korbanot a necessary step, or just a leftover from a more primitive past? Perhaps korbanot weren't an end in itself, but a means, a temporary bridge from a world of raw, external ritual to an era of internal transformation. And in that sense, they were never really about the blood or the fire, were they? They were about the process of awakening. I want to thank you so much for watching this video. Your support by subscribing is greatly appreciated. Please share and like. Catch all my videos on Rumble and YouTube and across the various social media platforms. The links to my Shmu's Views Locals community, Substack, and blogger page are in the description below. So until next time, I want to wish you a shalom.